Can you hear me now? Can you let me know if you can hear me? Says I'm live. Doesn't say I'm live here. Is there something wrong? All right, we get to come back our first day and we get to have hiccups. How about that, everyone? This is my favorite. Let's see. There we go. All right, now we got to see if people can hear me. Woohoo! Yay! I don't know what I did. It must have just came through. Yay! Okay, I apologize about that. And I apologize. I pride myself on starting pretty close to on time and didn't quite get there tonight. So hopefully you guys will forgive me for that. All right. So we are on to our next chapter of Operation Gladio. It is chapter 11. Here, let me make sure I get the title correctly. Let's see. So it's going to be high times, new crimes. So there's going to be a lot of, hopefully you guys have taken the time to go through and to catch up on the previous episodes, because everything that we've gone through, all of the details of Operation Gladio, how the banking system works, how the CIA, the Vatican, the mafia, the drug cartel, how all that stuff works and how it's brought into the country. It is all part of everything that's going on today. And it's so important. So now we're getting to the part of the book where it's getting into the meat and the potatoes. So if you know everyone involved and you know what's going on, you will understand exactly where we are at. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time. You know what? Everyone who's in chat, let me know how you're doing. And let's just catch up. So I was in Arizona for 7 days. It was the first time I've taken a week off from streaming since I've started probably a year and a half ago or a year. I don't know. It's been a really, really long time. Even when I travel, I bring all of my equipment and I set it up, and I'll even rent a Starlink when I go to Lake Powell to do a couple streams and to catch up with everyone. This time, unfortunately, I brought everything, had everything set up, and the internet service they had was a dish. And if anyone does any type of live streaming, Dish does not work very well for live streaming. So FYI, if you live stream, don't get a Dish. I even brought my HDMI cable and it was hardwired and everything was set to go. But so I had everything set up, didn't work. So I blame my guy. I took a week off and now I'm back. And now we're getting back and we're getting focused on the important things that are going on in the world. And Operation Gladio and understanding it is the very key to everything. Everything that's going on the campuses right now, if you understand Operation Gladio and you go back to that 30,000-foot overview, and you don't pay attention to all of the clips that are posted, and you don't listen to mainstream media or those mainstream media that just happen to post on X, you'll understand that it is a lot more complicated than that. And but you'll understand it and you'll see it differently and you'll realize that everyone is so misguided. I had someone send me some documents too about where all the funding is coming from, and maybe we will cover that one night on my Rumble channel. If you guys want to, I can pull them up and we can go through them. It was pretty interesting. So we're going to go ahead and get started with chapter 11. I hope everything is working okay on. Looks like it. Okay, so I've got people. It says I'm good on Rumble. Looks like I'm good on Twitter. Okay. You know what? When you take a week off, you kind of feel like a rookie. Should we talk about the elephant in the room? I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the news or whatnot, but they are trying to pass a bill that is going to ban certain verses in the Bible that are perceived as anti-Semitic, according to the IHRA, which is the ADL's Anti-Semitic or Holocaust Remembrance Act, part of that whole bill. Very interesting. I haven't had a chance to check to see if it officially passed tonight. I thought that I saw somewhere that it did, and if that's accurate, that's very concerning. Very, very concerning with our free speech, and is I don't know what to think about it. Kind of, I don't know. Okay, let's get this book started. Let's get into Gladio. We're getting into the fun stuff, how they're the different operations. They're going to get into stuff going on and why was Italy so important? Why Italy? Why I've always wondered, especially the first this book, I wondered how come Italy is so important? Why do they have to stay independent? And their biggest fear when all of this stuff started after World War II was that Italy was starting to become communist. And the Dulles brothers, the United States, the CIA, the Vatican, and everyone did not want. Obviously, they didn't want it to be communist, but there's a bigger reason for that. And we're going to find out tonight what that reason is. Think of Italy, think of the waterways, think of the airspace, think of how, like to me, Italy seems small and I wouldn't think it's central, but it's very central to everything that's going on. So if they lose control of Italy, all of their plans, all of their years of hard work kind of go down the toilet. So with that said, guys, let's go ahead and pull this up and get started. I'm going to, like I always do, guys, we are listening to the book from Paul Williams. He was a Catholic by origin. And after writing this book, he's like, if you're a devout Catholic and you listen to this book, you'll start to question a lot of things. So you have to have your faith. This is not about religion, but everything is sourced, everything is documented. And if you're going to understand and learn Operation Gladio, this is the number one book to do. So we actually are listening to the chapter of the book. We will pause after each section and I will answer any questions that are in the chat that are relevant to what we are talking about. A lot of creators want you to donate super chats for me to read them or for chats. When I'm doing my documentaries or we're talking about these difficult topics, I just want to talk about and highlight the things that are relevant. So if you have questions, if I have the answer to them, I will answer them for you. If not, I will research them for a later time, or we'll figure it out. But every question is very important to me, whether you're on X, whether you're on Rumble, or on YouTube. So please, please, please leave your comments. Okay, I guess what I was originally trying to say is I'm gonna push play for just a minute, do a sound check, and you guys will let me know, 1, everything's okay, 2, you can't hear it, 5, it's blowing out your eardrums.
Chapter 10: High Times, New Crimes. Most well-developed heroin networks very quickly move towards a complementation of interests between the narcotics traffickers and corrupt elements of the enforcement agencies responsible for the suppression of the illicit drug trade. Alfred McCoy, The Politics of Heroin, 2003. Sindona's dream of an independent Sicily was shared by the CIA, not only because of its strategic location for U.S. military bases, but also because of the island's pivotal importance to the narcotics industry. By 1970, the Mafia had established hundreds of laboratories within Sicily for the refinement of heroin. One was an orange-roofed stucco villa on the Via Messina Marina. Another was a decrepit storefront near Brancaccio. The capos no longer needed the services of the Corsicans. They had established their own connections to the drug lords of Southeast Asia and had obtained the services of talented French scientists. To maintain their monopoly on the trade, the Sicilian mob worked with the Nixon administration in launching the so-called War on Drugs. The war resulted in raids by Interpol on Corsican laboratories throughout the French Riviera, eradicating the only source of competition. Business was booming. By 1971, there were more than 500,000 heroin addicts in the United States, producing a cash flow of $12 billion. On a government survey, 3,054,000 Americans admitted to using heroin at least once. Down at the morgue, where people don't lie, the numbers told a different story. 41% of the drug-related deaths were now linked to heroin. Southeast Asia remained the main source of opium. From Laos alone, over a ton of opium arrived every month in Saigon on C-47 military transport planes that had been provided by the CIA to Lieutenant General Vang Pao of the Royal Lao Army. So much opium was flowing into Saigon that 30% of the American servicemen in Vietnam became heroin addicts. Some of this same heroin was smuggled into the United States in body bags containing dead soldiers. When DEA agent Michael Levine attempted to bust this operation, he was warned off by his superiors, since such action could result in the exposure of the supply line from Longtieng. Cash from the network continued to be deposited by the mob in parochial banks throughout Italy. From these financial firms, including Banco Ambrosiano, the money flowed into the IOR, which continued to collect its 15% processing fee, before the funds were transferred to privately held mob accounts in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and the Bahamas. But this system was not equipped to handle the billions generated from the heroin trade throughout the world. And so, a host of new laundries were established by the CIA. Castle Bank and Trust. One of the first of these operations was Castle Bank and Trust, which was established in the Cayman Islands by the ubiquitous...
Okay, so are you guys starting to see why Italy was kind of important? It's right central into everything. You've got the Corsican mob. You had the refineries, which I found out just today that the United States and the CIA actually sabotaged the Italian refineries, and that is why they ended up having to go to the Corsican mob to do a lot of the stuff for refining. It was kind of crazy. Kind of a lot crazy.
Paul E. Hallowell in 1962. This bank, according to Penny Lernoux, author of In Banks We Trust, formed a bridge between the poppy fields of Thailand and organized crime in the United States, while Hallowell retained his dual role as CIA paymaster from off-the-record accounts and mobster's counselor. Hallowell organized an entire Caribbean banking circuit and numerous Panamanian shell companies. He continued to operate Sea Supply and became Thai consul in Miami, operating out of the American Bankers Insurance Building. Ever industrious, Hallowell also served as legal counsel to Meyer Lansky's protege Santo Trafficante and as an advisor to Lyndon Johnson. The Cayman Islands represented the ideal place for Hallowell's offshore banking company. A nation of 13,500 residents and 14,000 telex numbers for banks, sometimes no more than tiny offices, the Caymans offered banks a degree of secrecy that matched that of Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein. Within a decade, Castle Bank was joined in the Caymans by a branch of Nugan Hand Bank and the World Finance Corporation. All three dealt with the CIA, the Vatican, and mob boss Santo Trafficante. The CIA Casino. Initially, the funding for the Castle Bank came from the International Diversified Corporation, a CIA-controlled Panamanian holding company that had been set up by CIA operative Wallace Groves. A convicted felon who had served 2 years in prison for selling worthless stock, the agency had assigned Groves such tasks as organizing coups, funding political parties, and cleaning dirty money. Money flowed into the Castle Bank not only from International Diversified but also from a host of underworld figures, including Mo Dalitz, the racketeer who became known as Mr. Las Vegas, and Morris Kleinman, and Samuel A. Tucker, who operated the gambling syndicate in Ohio and the Desert Inn in Las Vegas. A sinister sister. Castle Bank and Trust was joined at the hip to Mercantile Bank and Trust, another CIA operation that was set up in the Bahamas by Hallowell. Castle.
Guys, question. When I just muted that, did that, I don't think it played when I muted. Did it still play even though I was muted? Sorry, I had someone come up the stairs. That usually never happens while I'm streaming. My goodness. Welcome first day back to streaming after a vacation, everybody. Everything good? Okay.
Castle owned a large block of stock in Mercantile and vice versa, and both became principal depositors in each other's operation. In addition, the banks shared most of the same directors. Money flowed back and forth in a bewildering array of transactions that included International Diversified. Mercantile and Castle interlocked with Underwriters Bank Limited, another firm that Hallowell created in the Bahamas. The majority shareholder of this firm was the American insurance conglomerate American International Underwriters Corp., AIUC, which was established as part of the insurance empire headed by former OSS agent C.V. Starr, and evolved into the giant multinational AIG, American International Group. AIUC, according to Peter Dale Scott, author of The American War Machine, was an insurance conglomerate with suspected ties to the CIA in Southeast Asia. In 1976, Mercantile was closed by the Bahamian government after investors discovered that the bank's holdings were worthless. This came as a surprise to the shareholders, since Pricewaterhouse, the prestigious accounting firm, had certified a few months before the collapse that Mercantile possessed $25.1 billion in assets. Unfortunately, these assets were alleged loans given to unidentified individuals. The money vanished into the agency's black hole. The black hole. In 1977, the IRS launched an investigation into the affairs of the Castle Bank that became known as Project Haven. Investigators obtained evidence that the source of much of the money deposited in the bank by underworld figures was the heroin trade in Southeast Asia. Such evidence led to a grand jury investigation. But after the jury was assembled, the investigation was called off. The CIA had issued a warning to the U.S. Justice Department that the pursuit of criminal proceedings against the Castle Bank would endanger national security. The Washington Post later uncovered an IRS memo stating that the case against Castle involved hundreds of millions of dollars. The final figure might never be known because of the strict disclosure laws concerning Bahamian bank records. A dead banker. On January 27, 1980, two Australian policemen, driving along the Great Western Highway near the port of Sydney, came upon a 1977 Mercedes-Benz parked along the side of the road. Inside the car, slumped across the front seat, was the body of a burly, middle-aged man. Searching his pockets, the policeman found the business card of William Colby, former director of the CIA. On the back of the card was Colby's itinerary for his trip to Hong Kong and Singapore. The dead man's hand was wrapped around the barrel of a new .30 caliber rifle. Next to the body was a Bible with a meat pie wrapper as a bookmark. On the wrapper were scrawled the names of Colby and California Congressman Bob Wilson, then the ranking Republican on the House Armed Services Committee. The dead man was identified as Frank Nugan, co-owner of the Nugan Hand Bank and one of the most prominent lawyers in Australia. His death was ruled a suicide, despite the fact that Nugan's fingerprints were not on the rifle, and only a contortionist could have shot himself in the head from the position in which he was found in the vehicle. When Nugan's partner, Michael Hand, a former Green Beret who had served in Vietnam, learned of the death, he rushed back to Sydney from a business trip in London and began shredding enough of the bank's documents to fill a small cottage. The next day, Hand held a meeting of Nugan Hand Bank directors in which he warned them that they must follow his instructions in destroying all records of transactions. Otherwise, they would finish up with concrete shoes, or find their wives being delivered to them in pieces. By June 1980, Nugan Hand Limited was in liquidation. It owed about $50 million to creditors. Hand fled to the United States, never to be seen or heard from again. The Black Bank.
Interesting. So 1977, William Colby was found dead in a car. He was headed to Hong Kong and then to Singapore. Bob Wilson from California was left on a note in a Bible. Ranking Senator, House Representative at the time. What are the ties? Hi, Julian, welcome. So I wonder what his ties are going to be. So what does Nugan do? He rushes back. So can you see all these countries? Even Australia is in here. And just so you guys remember, every single country has their own form of the CIA. And a lot of them work together hand in hand, whether they're all part of this secret little club government, if you want to call it, is a different story. However, why is he rushing off to Australia to destroy bank records? All evidence? Well, if you're going to have this lifestyle, I think it's wise not to have a family.
The Nugan Hand Bank had been established in 1973 by Nugan and Hand. Shortly after setting up headquarters in Sydney, the bank blossomed into 22 branches. One branch was set up in Chiang Mai, the heart of Thailand's opium industry, in the same suite as the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. The DEA receptionist answered the bank's phone and took messages when the representatives were out. Neil Evans, the former head of the Chiang Mai branch, told investigators that he had seen millions pass through his office, claiming that the bank operated solely for the disbursement of funds anywhere in the world on behalf of the CIA, and also for the taking of money on behalf of the CIA. The money taken from the bank by the CIA was used to purchase weapons from international arms dealer Edwin Wilson for guerrilla forces in Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Brazil, and the White Rhodesian government of Ian Smith. Wilson was a former CIA operative who was later convicted of selling arms and explosives to the Libyan government of Muammar Gaddafi. Funds were also shelled out to undermine the Liberal government of Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, who had pulled Australian troops out of Vietnam and condemned the bombing of Hanoi. These actions were orchestrated by Theodore Shackley, the CIA's Deputy Director of Operations. After Whitlam was removed from office by John Kerr, Australia's Governor-General, in 1975, the Black Ops money flowed to Italy and the IOR for support of the Christian Democrats. The bank also imported heroin into Australia from the Golden Triangle. This dirty work was done by Australian police officers in service to the CIA, according to the Commonwealth New South Wales Joint Task Force on Drug Trafficking. In 1976, one such officer, Murray Riley, organized 5 shipments of heroin into Australia, mostly in false-bottom suitcases. For each shipment, the branches of the Nugan Hand were used to transfer the purchase money from Sydney to Hong Kong. Over 100 pounds of heroin was involved in each importation, and much of this was eventually shipped from Hong Kong to the United States. Riley was also involved in 2 heroin importations in July and September 1977. The Spook Staff. The President.
The Spook Staff. Wow. That's our next chapter. Hold on. I've got to adjust this keyboard. I don't have things set up where I can see. Hold on one sec. All right. So, more easily disappeared than civilian. 1 second. Hopefully this isn't really loud. Okay, there we go. All right. So, they have the bank in Australia, and that bank pretty much operated as a CIA bank. They actually had an operator from the DEA that answered the phones. So you can see all these banks were set up all over the world. So there wasn't just in Italy. It wasn't just the Castle Rock Bank in the Bahamas. They had banks everywhere. And then they had little tiny banks like shell banks that they would launder money in, and they would transfer them back and forth. The end goal was always to get it to the IOR, which is the Vatican Bank. From there, they would pay out, buy weapons, get heroin, and they would bring it into the United States, sell it. And this whole process starts over and over again. So we're starting to learn a little bit more about Hong Kong and the relations. So Hong Kong is new as of this chapter. Before we talked about Thailand, Burma, Laos, Italy, South America, some of the key players in the United States, bankers, and that type of thing. So we're going back in history. We've gone all the way up to 1985 in South America. So now we're in about 1977. So I'm going to try, if they're switching the dates up on us, I'm going to push pause, and we're going to think, what else was going on in 1977? So at this same time, this is when they are starting to overthrow a lot of the governments and create coups in South America. So kind of pay attention to that. So these are all this stuff is going on at the same time. The Castle Rock Bank was for Central America mainly. So I'm kind of confused as to how that's going to tie into Australia. But maybe Australia is not part of Asia. So the Asian country, Southeast Asia, was the banks that were set up by Sindona. It was a completely different bank. Yeah, this was in South America. I actually, to be completely honest with everyone, and I've said this before, after I went through the stuff that they did in South America, I think I took like 4 weeks off from covering Gladio. I was still learning. I was still researching a bunch of stuff, but the things that went on there were so horrific. The way it was no longer about communism, right? Everything at this point, up until about 1969, 1967, don't quote me on the dates, but it's around that time frame. It's been legitimately trying to stave off communism. So when they're going into South America, and I'm not saying what they're doing is okay ever. Like, I'm not condoning any behavior. I'm relaying you information, and you guys come to your own information, your own conclusions about it. But what they were doing in South America, they weren't communist. They just did not agree with the United States and other countries going into their country, overthrowing their government, and then coming in, buying up their land, forcing their government. Well, okay, they paid the government. You'd come over and you be the ruler. You do what we say. We'll give you this much money. But in return for that money and for giving you, the presidency or the whatever their position is in every country, what we're going to do for you, what you're going to do for us is you're going to allow us to buy up these facts. So they bring factories into their country. They would hire people from the country, but they paid them slave wages. They hardly made any money. So they go into these countries, they overthrow governments, they go in there and set up their industries, their farmland, their whatever, and and impoverish these countries. And they cause civil unrest because they were running. I'm not going to say every country ran just fine before then, but for the most part, they liked their way of life. So you have these people that have to do what these other governments, and mainly the United States, says. You can do these things. We're going to own this. You can own this, and your citizens can own this, right? And then they take their resources on top of that. So if there's gold, if there's oil, if there's coal, if there's any resource, they will find a way to set up an industry or something that they can go mine the resources and make money off of it. It doesn't go to that country that they took the resources from. It goes to Britain, it goes to the United States, it goes to Italy, it goes to everyone but those countries. And mostly it goes to the central bank. It always ends up to the key players at the end. But that's what they're doing. And this is why we have these people coming from other countries acting like angry. Well, they're not acting, they're angry. They're angry at us for acting like imperialists. And we always do it under the guise of we're doing what's best for the people. We're going in to save them. We're doing what's good for them. That's what they say they're doing. It's not what happens. And these people, their lives get turned upside down. They're poor. Their kids are starving. Anyway, so yes, still life. This does happen happened in South America. It happened in Turkey, Italy, France, Spain, Hungary, Russia. Yeah, some in Russia. They didn't I don't know if they overthrew their government after 1947, but they did do Gladio operations. So Gladio operations, for those who are just joining for the first time, are what we call left behind soldiers. Some people call them the color guard or the color revolution. They changed the name of the operation in every country for whatever purpose. That's what confuses people. But at the end of the day, it's all Gladio operations. The CIA, along with other people, provide weapons, anti-terrorist training, anti-communist training, anti-fascist training, um, anti-anything training that the United States does is a red flag. So they leave behind these soldiers, they train them, and they live like everyday citizens, everyday people. They, like me, they could have a podcast pretending to be whatever. And when they are called upon to serve or to do their thing, they are supposed to do it. Think of what happened in Russia not too long ago. Think about that building that they happened to attack was somewhere that Trump has been. That was, to me, that was a signal. It might not be to other people. Think about J6. Think about how organized everything is right now. And it's really, really hard to take a step back and be logical and not emotional about it. Because if you're emotional, you're going to pick a side, and you're going to pick that side and stick with it because that's what your convictions say. But if you take a step back and you look at the whole picture and you look at all of these operations that have taken place since 1947, and these things are well documented. You can get right now on Google and you can search everything I'm talking about it, and it's documented. A lot of this information also comes from declassified information that from the CIA, from our government. Yeah, there's no red versus blue. And that's been the goal, is to have red versus blue, left versus right, white versus black. As long as we are fighting each other, we're not paying attention. And right now, out of everything that I have ever covered, anything I've ever talked about, and I will say this till I'm blue in the face, this is the most important thing that every single person in this country needs to figure out, because if you understand what they're doing, they can't hide it. And they're starting to fumble. People are starting to wake up and understand that this is the goal. And the biggest goal of everything is to bring in the fourth industrial revolution, which is where all AI and everything is going to be controlled with AI. That's why they want depopulation. Why? We don't need you useless eaters on this planet. We can do all of this stuff without AI. They only need enough food for them. They don't need food for us. We can eat crickets and they can have delicious steak from a great, amazing cow, and we'll eat crickets. If you understand it and enough people know, and we all stick together, I don't know if we can stop it. I hope we can. That's my whole purpose in this. Okay, there was my little diatribe. I apologize. Still, that was a great question. And yes, it is happening everywhere. But we're getting more into like Australia's a new key, England it. A lot of the players are the same. Once again, I didn't make slides because before there were so many moving parts and so many new people that we needed slides. And I think I'll still go back and make slides because I like having them for other topics that we do. All right, let's continue on, guys.
President of the Nugan Hand Bank was Admiral Earl Preston Yates, who served as the Deputy Chief of Staff at U.S. Pacific Command during the final stages of the American withdrawal from Vietnam. General Edwin Fahey Black, the bank's representative in Hawaii, commanded American troops in Thailand during the Vietnam War, having previously served with the National Security Council, NSC, and the Office of Strategic Services, OSS. Lieutenant General Leroy Joseph Manor, who worked for the bank in the Philippines, had been appointed Chief of Staff of the Pacific Command, while General Earl Koch, a World War II veteran and former Brigadier General of the Georgia National Guard, worked as a consultant for the branch in Washington. The board of directors and administrative staff members of Nugan Hand represented a who's who of prominent CIA officials. A partial list is as follows. Dr. Guy Parker, an expert from the Rand Corporation, a CIA think tank, who served as a financial consultant. Major General Richard Secord, director of the Defense Security Assistance Agency, who worked closely with Ted Shackley in smuggling heroin money out of Vietnam in large suitcases. The money was stored in a bank account that was accessible only to Secord, Shackley, and CIA agent Thomas G. Clines. Walter McDonald, retired CIA Deputy Director and head of the Annapolis branch. Dale Holmgreen, former chairman of the CIA's Civil Air Transport and manager of the Taiwan branch. Theodore Shackley, former CIA Deputy Director for Clandestine Operations. Richard L. Armitage, special consultant to the Pentagon in Thailand, who oversaw the transfer of heroin profits from Indonesia to Shackley's account in Tehran, Iran. Patry Loomis, former CIA advisor to the Provincial Reconnaissance Unit in Vietnam. Robert Red Jansen, former CIA station chief in Bangkok, who represented Nugan Hand in Thailand. The man nobody knew. William Colby served as legal counsel. After organizing the Gladio unit in Scandinavia, he was dispatched by the agency to Rome, where he worked with the Vatican in thwarting the growth of the Italian Communist Party. His budget for black ops in Italy was $25 million a year. Colby was the ultimate Vatican insider. He became keenly aware of the not-so-holy ghosts within the Holy See. He once famously remarked that the global intelligence services maintained by the Vatican left the CIA in the shade. As the commander of the CIA station in Saigon, Colby ran intelligence operations during the Vietnam War, including Operation Phoenix, a Stalin-like program that resulted in the assassination of an estimated 40,000 South Vietnamese civilians who were suspected of collaborating with the Viet Cong. From September 1973 to January 1976, he served as the director of the CIA. He was removed from this position by President Ford after revelations of domestic spying by the agency captured national headlines. 4 years later, his business card was found in Frank Nugan's pocket. No doubt Colby, who was deeply involved with Gladio, realized the need to establish a new laundry for drug money in Australia. The worldwide demand for heroin had surpassed the wildest dreams of Lucky Luciano. New heroin laboratories had sprung up in Burma, Thailand, and Laos to produce the paste that was shipped on to Hong Kong and Palermo for further refinement. The annual income from the 40% tax, which Shan United Army Commander Kun Sa imposed on the 10 to 20 laboratories along the Thai-Burma border in northern Burma, amounted to $200 million a year. A spook's spook. Throughout his career...
Hold on one sec. 20 million. So, Colby's Black Ops Fund. Hi, Andy. How are you? Welcome. Colby's Black Ops Fund was $25 million a year. That was back in the 60s, 70s. That's a lot of money. Operation Phoenix was in Vietnam, and the operation ended up killing over 40,000 people. And if I remember correctly, I don't have to go back and see, but I think Kissinger was involved at this time, or he might have been shortly after. And all of this was all about weapons, drugs, weapons, money. So at the end of the day, what this all comes down to is money. And how are they going to be able to operate under the radar with the protection of the U.S. government? If it's in the name of national security, they don't have to report to the president, and or they do only if he asks. Then they have to disclose information. So they're making so much money off of the drug trade that they have to expand their operations. So they're starting to go into Australia and set up laboratories there. The drug trade that was in Burma was $20 million a year off of heroin. It's kind of interesting because I kind of think about this currently. There's a lot of people, like when we came out of Afghanistan rather quickly, we were finally able to come out of there. Is it because they finally had a synthetic way through fentanyl to not have to grow fentanyl or to grow heroin poppy seeds anymore? Something I need to research, but it's just a question I have out there. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Hi, Sing. How are you? Welcome. I've missed all you guys. I'm sorry I'm a little rusty tonight. I don't know what my deal is.
Career, Colby remained loyal to the Vatican. Like so many of his fellow spooks, he was a member of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, SMOM, and held clandestine meetings with fellow knight Jelly. Colby also had strong ties to the mafia. After the shutdown of Nuganhand, he worked with members of the Giannini crime family to set up Household International in Chicago, another CIA financial front. Household conducted ongoing business with the gangster-infiltrated First National Bank of Cicero and the Vatican-controlled Continental Bank, both of which are now defunct. A spook's spook, Colby met with a mysterious end. Late one stormy night in May 1996, he stepped away from a half-eaten supper of clams and white wine at his riverside home in Rock Point, Maryland, apparently gripped by a sudden desire to go fishing minus his usual life jacket. Despite continuous sweeps, it took a week for divers to find his body, which remained a few feet from the empty skiff. The drug bust. By 1978, the Nuganhand Bank was doing billions.
Okay, let's pause real quick. So, everyone that was a part of Operation Gladio ended up being. I actually had to ask Colonel Towner. She actually covers the same topic. She's really good at articulating everything. She was a colonel in the military. She had no idea about any of these things. She stumbled across Operation Gladio, very similar to the way that I did, where she started with, doing history, like the World War I's, the World War II's, and there's this progression. And then you hear this word Gladio, and you're like, what is that? Like, I don't know what that is. And so you start digging. You're like, oh my gosh, what is this, right? So She does everything very, very eloquently, but she was telling me, because I actually asked her in, X Spaces, I couldn't understand why everyone had to become a knight in order to be part of this process. So every CIA agent, they all became a Knight of Malta. The Vatican knights them. Um, and what that does, it allows these people to meet once or twice a year in secret, or not in secret. They can do it openly and say, hey, we're going to meet as the Knights of Malta. And that is where these higher ups would get together and they would collaborate and they would plan, or they whatever they do to I'm obviously not part of it, so I don't know what they do behind closed doors. I'm assuming it's so they can plan out their operations, and other different things. So Colby decides to go fishing about 4 years later without his life jacket and is not seen for a whole entire week later. And when they find him, he is no longer alive. Possibly, hopefully, possibly.
In business, but all things must come to an end. Within a year, the operation came to a screeching halt, due in part to the delayed repercussion from the fall of Saigon on April 30th, 1975. Once the major gateway to the world market for Laotian heroin laboratories, Saigon now became a dead end for Southeast Asia's drug traffic, thanks to the anti-drug policies of the Viet Cong. Crude opium still crossed the border from Laos to service the city's declining addict population, but choice number 4 heroin was no longer available. The syndicates that had produced the high-grade product moved to markets in Europe and the United States. Other factors contributed to the bank's cash flow problems as well. Between 1978 and 1980, the Golden Triangle was hit with 2 severe droughts. The droughts were followed by 2 seasons of intense monsoon rains, which reduced the region's opium production to a record low. The usual 600-ton opium harvests were cut to 160 tons in 1978 and 240 tons in 1979. Wow. The natural catastrophes were accompanied by concerted efforts by the Burmese and Thai governments to eradicate poppy production, necessitated by the fact that opium remained the main source of revenue for the Shan guerrilla armies. From 1976 to 1979, the Burmese army destroyed 4 major heroin laboratories near the Thai border, netting impressive quantities of precursor chemicals. A turning point. A turning point had been reached. Southeast Asia could no longer remain the main source of...
All right. So with the fall of Saigon, the heroin trade came to a complete end. Drug trafficking was prohibited by the government, and the reason being is they figured out that the heroin drug trade is what was funding all of the guerrilla armies, all the people coming out and attacking people. That's where they were getting all their money. Another thing that happened is a Golden Triangle, which is Burma, Thailand, and Laos, from 1978 to 1979, experienced severe drought. And so the Chinese wanted to get rid of, what is Julie saying? An echo? Rumble chat or Rumble? Sorry, pardon me. Let me know if it's a chat or if it is me echoing. I shouldn't be echoing on that one. Oh, that's weird. Interesting. All right, so these chapters are a lot quicker. I'm just summing them up. Does anyone have questions thus far? Do you guys remember that during Operation Mockingbird, they set up in about 1953, where they went and they bought off all of the media. They paid everyone off, newspapers, radio stations, anyone that they could, they paid off to make sure that they spun a good light on the United States and the drug trade. So they made it so that China was blamed for the drug problem and not the United States. And this is the one thing, and this is where I'm on the fence about everything about China that I've ever been taught or everything I've ever been told about them. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just questioning it because maybe they're not the ones to blame for the fentanyl coming into the United States. The United States blamed China on the heroin crisis, and it clearly was not.
Source of heroin revenue for Gladio. New poppy fields had to be planted in countries that possessed the proper climate and terrain, cool plateaus above 500 feet. There, the plants would grow rapidly and propagate easily, and the real work came with the harvesting. The poppy heads had to be scraped as soon as the petals fell off, causing the plants to ooze sticky sap that was squeezed into banana leaves. Such intensive work required not only a slave labor force, but a strong-arm government that could benefit from the production of narcotics. Before the outbreak of the Vietnam War, Turkey was an important source of opium in Europe and the United States. But in 1967, the Turkish government announced its plans to abolish opium production. Within a matter of months, the number of Turkish provinces producing poppies declined from 21 to 4. The total ban was imposed in 1972. The elite CIA and U.S. State Department officials in charge of Operation Gladio were at their wits' end. The threat of communism had not been eradicated. The world was still not safe for democracy. The need for black operations was intensifying not only in Italy and South America, but also in the Middle East. With the setbacks in Southeast Asia, the source of funding for the creation of the New World Order was in jeopardy. In August 1978, when it seemed that matters couldn't get any worse, Pope Paul VI suffered a massive heart attack and died at Castel Gandolfo. And his successor, Albini Luciani, who called himself John Paul I, issued a call for reform. Chapter 11. A papal problem.
Okay, I was wondering how Turkey, because Turkey has the biggest force of Gladio soldiers. They have for a long time. And now I'm starting to understand, since they're moving the production of poppy fields to Turkey, it's starting to make a lot of sense. If they have Gladio soldiers, they're going to protect the poppy fields. Plus, they have a big border. Do they have a? I'll have to look at the map. I'm thinking that they have the biggest border with Russia out of all of the UN nations.
Problem. I chose the same names as my beloved predecessor, John Paul I. Indeed, as soon as he announced to the Sacred College on August 26, 1978, that he wished to be called John Paul I, such a double name being unprecedented in the history of the papacy, I saw in it a clear presage of grace for the new pontificate. Since that pontificate lasted barely 33 days, it falls to me not only to continue it, but in a certain sense to take it up again at the same starting point. This is confirmed by my choice of these two names: Pope John Paul II, Redemptor Hominis, March 4, 1979. Before his death, Pope Paul VI decided to put to task the College of Cardinals by making the process of electing his successor as grueling as possible. Knowing that previous conclaves had been bugged, he left instructions that all cardinal electors swear a solemn oath not to divulge the results of the balloting to any outside source, or to discuss the results with other princes of the Church. Swiss guards were placed outside every entrance and beneath every window, just in case one of the septuagenarian cardinals attempted to escape from a high tower. Within the Sistine Chapel, where the conclave was held, the cardinals, who were accustomed to living in regal splendor within luxurious apartments, were confined to single cells without any amenities. Before entering the cells, the cardinals were searched by guards for bugging devices or other means of communication, including pencils and notepads. The cells have no toilets and no running water, Cardinal Giuseppe Siri complained to an attendant. It is impossible to live any longer under these conditions. The strange little fellow. At the start of the conclave, on August 25, 1978, the 111 cardinals were marched in silence to the chapel. The presiding cardinal, the Camerlengo, took roll call and ordered the purpled prelates to kneel while beating their breasts and chanting the Latin hymn, Veni Creator Spiritus. Many within the Sacred Assembly were disgruntled to find that they were not treated like princes of Holy Mother Church, but prisoners in San Quentin. To make matters worse, the conclave took place in the midst of an oppressive heat wave. The temperature in Rome soared above 94 degrees. The situation within the chapel soon became unbearable, with every door locked and barred and every window boarded and sealed. Small wonder that the traditionalists and progressives came to an immediate compromise by electing Albino Luciano, a strange little fellow, as the new pope. The appearance of the smiling new pontiff on the central loggia of St. Peter's Basilica caused noted journalist and Vatican insider John Cornwell to gasp, "My God, that's Peter Sellers. They've made Peter Sellers a pope." Cardinal Cody. The conclave may not have been bugged.
So there's two things. Just about every president in the United States has been aware of Operation Gladio, and every pope that is aware of it as well because of the way they run the money through the IRO. So they have to have those people working together. Any president that did know about these things or any pope that knew about these things that was not okay with what was going on either was assassinated or they figured out how to remove them. And when I say remove, unalive them.
But it had been rigged. The CIA was fearful that the cardinals might elect Cardinal Giovanni Benelli, the Archbishop of Florence, or Cardinal Aloisio Lorscheider, the leading Catholic prelate in Brazil, as pope. Benelli, a moderate, had been so horrified by the Sindona affair that he called for the removal of Archbishop Marcinkus as the head of the Vatican Bank. Cardinal Lorscheider represented an even more odious choice since he was an advocate of liberation theology. Soon after Pope Paul suffered his first heart attack, the agency arranged for Cardinal John Cody, the Archbishop of Chicago, to travel to Poland for a meeting with Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, the Archbishop of Krakow, who had attracted the attention of the U.S. intelligence community with his strong stance against communism and his openness to the strategy of Operation Gladio. Cody, by his own admission, was a CIA operative who had served the agency since the time of its establishment. The cardinal had even been dispatched on mysterious missions to Saigon. In charge of the total assets of the Roman Catholic Church in Chicago, in excess of $1 billion, Cody worked closely with David Kennedy at Continental Illinois, which held the deposits of the diocese. Through Kennedy, the cardinal developed close relationships with Michele Sindona and Archbishop Marcinkus. During the 1970s, Cody diverted millions of dollars via Kennedy's Chicago bank to Marcinkus at the IOR. Marcinkus, in turn, would channel the money to cardinals in Poland, including Wojtyla. The reason for the transfers of such large amounts of money was never adequately explained. The Dark Horse. The only...
Okay, so I think along with everything else that everyone is doing, so Marcinkus was removed from the head of the IOR, which is the Vatican Bank. Cody was a CIA operative who worked closely with David Kennedy, and he's the one that was in Chicago who was recruited by the mafia to set up a bank there. So it's between Cody and Marcinkus, they had, in the 1970s, they had stolen and diverted millions of dollars from the Vatican Bank. So I'm thinking that they're kind of skimming a little bit here.
only ecclesiastical purpose for Cody's trip to Krakow was to cultivate Wojtyla's interest in a dark horse candidacy for the papacy. While Cody remained in Poland, Cardinal John Kroll of Philadelphia began to work the phones in support of the little-known Pole, who was not a member of the Roman Curia. Kroll was a formidable church figure with high-powered friends, including 3 former American presidents, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. The cultivation of a dark horse was necessitated by the fear that Cardinal Sebastiano Baggio, the prefect of the Sacred Congregation for Bishops, might fail to capture the needed votes for the Holy Office. Baggio, a prominent member of P2, had served Operation Condor by purging the Latin American Bishops' Conference of all proponents of liberation theology. Moreover, he had openly pledged to conduct business as usual, with Marcinkus and Calvi remaining in control of the IOR. Prior to the conclave, the cardinals with ties to P2 met at Villa Stritch on the outskirts of Rome to plan alternative courses of action during the conclave. One alternative was the selection of Albino Luciani as the next pontiff. He was a simple man with a nervous smile and an ungainly appearance, who, they agreed, was afraid of his own shadow. Bogus securities. The new pope.
Can you guys kind of see how every time that there's an issue, anytime someone's not going along, they meet and they figure out how they're going to replace them. So the dark horse, all the cardinals of P2 met in Rome, and they wanted to appoint a new pontiff. Hey, LW, welcome everyone. Gosh dang, I've missed you guys, by the way. Welcome.
Called himself John Paul I and pledged to follow in the footsteps of his two immediate predecessors. And few within the CIA and the Sicilian Mafia fancied him a threat to the existing order of things. But a series of articles appeared on the front pages of leading Italian newspapers and periodicals, including Il Mondo and La Stampa, which called upon the new Holy Father to reform the Vatican Bank and to put an end to the Church's ties to the most cynical financial dealers in the world, from Sindona to the bosses of the Continental Illinois Bank in Chicago. Through Cardinal Bonelli, who became his friend and counselor, John Paul was aware of the Vatican's involvement in a plot to sell $1 billion in counterfeit securities. The deal had been forged by Sindona, who made arrangements for the preparation of the bogus securities with members of the Gambino family in New York. To verify the Holy See's involvement in the scheme, Cardinal Eugène Tisserand, Dean of the College of Cardinals, had provided the Mafia with a letter bearing the official insignia of the Sacra Congregazione dei Religiosi. Phony bonds from companies such as American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T, General Electric, Chrysler, and Pan American World Airways were delivered in July 1971 to the IOR. In order to ensure that the bonds would be accepted as genuine, Archbishop Marcinkus made trial deposits at the Handelsbanken in Zurich and at Banca di Roma. The securities were examined and certified as authentic. The problem arose when officials of both banks went with samples of the bonds to examiners at the Bankers Association in New York, who found that the securities were counterfeit. Word went out to Interpol. The Organized Crime and Racketeering Division of the U.S. Department of Justice sought an interview with Cardinal Tisserand, only to learn that the Vatican official had died of natural causes. After questioning Marcinkus, U.S. officials sought an indictment for his arrest. But the Nixon administration called a halt to the probe, and the case against the Archbishop was placed among the dead files of the FBI. The preliminary report.
1 second. I've always wondered if Nixon was part of them. I'm still on the fence about it. Okay, so that was a lot to unravel right there. There's a lot. So we have the dark horse. The cardinals of P2 met in Rome. They wanted to appoint John Paul I. They did not see him as a threat. They wanted the Holy Father to reform the IOR bank. John Paul became aware of the Pope's involvement with P2. One of the cardinals delivered a letter to Sindona. So they delivered a letter to Sindona to let him know that the bonds that they had got with their money were secure. And Marcinkus made sure of that. Well, when they take him to New York, they are found to be not valid, to be fraudulent. So the securities were counterfeit. The Vatican had and in the meantime, the Vatican had died of natural causes. So this Pope was not on trivia is starting up. What? Trivia Fools is starting up trivia? What? All right, so the Pope is the one who wanted to reform the IRO. John Paul I, they recruited him because they knew they recruit these people who they know are going to do their bidding. The Pope wanted to reform the IOR. If I remember correctly, I'll have to go back and look at my slides. But if I remember correctly, John Paul was the one that died in 63. Let me look real quick. Because if he died in 63, then everything I'm going to tell you is accurate. Hold on. The thing with popes, John. No, not the same one. Okay. No, this was not the same one that died in 63. This is a different one. My apologies. Or was there two John Paul I? Is that what they were saying? Nope. What did Pope Paul do in 1963? Okay, this is a different pope. Okay, so Pope Francis described him as. So what did he do? So they had the Pope that died in June of 1963. This is the same year that JFK died. So Pope John Paul was head of the Catholic Church and sovereign of the Vatican City from the 26th of August. It took him 2 months to replace him. 1978. No. Never mind. I should have had this one researched. I thought it was the same guy. Anyway, in my opinion, and this is just simply my opinion, that any time that a pope ends up not being alive, it's usually, if it's mysterious circumstances, is typically because he didn't go along with what they wanted to do. So they were going to investigate Sindona for these fraudulent bonds. They were going to investigate the IOR and this whole entire thing, and Nixon put a complete stop to it. Gray and black Pope dictate them? Yes.
1 week after his election, John Paul received a preliminary report on the internal workings of the Vatican Bank from Cardinal Vio, who remained the Holy See's Secretary of State. The bank, which had been formed to further religious works, was now serving a distinctly secular purpose. Of the 11,000 accounts within its registry, fewer than 1,650 served to further an ecclesiastical cause. The remaining 9,000.
I muted myself when? Because I haven't been muted. No? Did I mute myself? Anyone else in chat and YouTube? Can you hear me? Can you hear me in Rumble? I didn't think I muted myself. You've got sound? Okay. Let's push play.
1,350 accounts served as slush funds for special friends of the Vatican, including Sindona, Calvi, Gelli, Marcinkus, and leading Sicilian mafiosi, including the made men of the Corleone, Spatola, and Incerillo families, and members of the Camorra of Naples and Milan. The Banda della Magliana gang serviced the accounts of Giuseppe Pippo Callo, the mafia's head cashier, who served as the boss of the Porta Nuova clan. Other accounts were held by leading Italian politicians and businessmen in service to Operation Gladio, and still others for the foreign embassies of Iran, Iraq, Indonesia, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and other countries. The Santa Ana Gate within Vatican City opened to a busy thoroughfare as thugs with suitcases filled with drug money marched past the Swiss guards up the stairs to the IOR. Members of the Italian underworld, for the most part, remained traditionalists who shied away from electronic bank transfers. Financial shenanigans.
I wonder why they stayed away from electronic bank transfers. Is it because they're traceable, maybe?
On September 7th, Cardinal Giovanni Benelli, the Archbishop of Florence, conveyed to the Holy Father even worse news. The Bank of Italy was investigating the links between Roberto Calvi of Banco Ambrosiano and the Vatican Bank, including Calvi's purchase of Banca Cattolica del Veneto from the IOR in 1972. This purchase had occurred when John Paul was Archbishop of Venice. The sale had been made without his consultation, let alone that of any other patriarch or prelate. Everything about this transaction was mysterious. Banca Cattolica del Veneto was one of Italy's wealthiest banks, with vast real estate holdings in northern Italy. Calvi, on behalf of Banco Ambrosiano, purchased 50% of the shares for $46.5 million, around $2 billion in today's money. But the shares never left the Vatican. Instead, the stock was reassigned to Zitropo, a company owned by Sindona. Zitropo was then sold to Calvi, and in 1978 the company was acquired by the Vatican. All this time, the shares of Banca Cattolica del Veneto never left the Vatican safe. The investigators sent a preliminary report concerning these irregularities to Judge Emilio Alessandrini. The final report, Cardinal Benelli told the Pope, could result in criminal charges not only against Calvi but also leading Vatican officials, including Archbishop Marcinkus and his two close IOR associates Luigi Manini and Pellegrino de Strobel. Neither Cardinal Benelli nor the Pope were aware that the troublesome matter of Judge Alessandrini was under control, and that criminal charges would not be filed against Calvi and his
I think it's Goodell. Like this actually is one of my favorite readers. He does a lot of my hi JJ, welcome. He does a lot of my I used to do a lot of historical fiction, and he does a really good job typically.
IOR
I
cohorts.
think it's George Goodell.
On January 29, 1979, 5 gunmen murdered the Italian magistrate when his orange Renault 5 stopped for a red light on Via Muratori in Rome. The action accomplished its purpose. The investigation of Calvi and the Vatican officials came to an abrupt halt. Masonic cabal. The most appalling revelation came on Tuesday, September 12th, when John Paul sat down at his desk to discover the latest copy of L'Osservatore Politico. This newsletter, published by Mino Pecorelli, contained a list of 121 leading Catholic clerics and laymen who were members of Masonic lodges with alleged ties to Licio Gelli and P2. If the list proved accurate, the Pope would have no recourse save to strip the cardinals, archbishops, bishops, and monsignors of their titles and offices, and to subject them to the right of excommunication in accordance with canon law. This action would constitute a pogrom of the papabili, the individuals closest to the chair of St. Peter. At the top of the list was the name of Cardinal Jean Villot, the Vatican Secretary of State. Villot's Masonic name was Gianni, and he had enrolled in a Zurich lodge on August 6, 1966. The Pope sought to see if the information was accurate by making contact with Italian officials through his close friends, Cardinal Pericle Felici and Monsignor Giovanni Benelli, whose names did not appear in the newsletter. Since all secret societies in Italy must register the names of their members with the state, officials were able to locate Italian Masons of the Zurich Lodge who confirmed that Cardinal Villot, indeed, had been inducted into the Order of Freemasonry. Another name on the list was that of Villot's assistant, Cardinal Sebastiano Baggio, Masonic name Siba. Lodge number 851640. Date of initiation, August 14, 1967. Again, the Pope and his associates made contact with the authorities and received confirmation that Cardinal Baggio indeed was a Mason in good standing. By the end of the day, John Paul had received verification of the membership of other leading Catholic dignitaries and Masonic lodges, including Monsignor Agostino Casaroli, his foreign minister, Cardinal Ugo Poletti, the vicar of Rome, Monsignor Pasquale Macci, who had been Paul VI's trusted secretary, and, last but not least, Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who controlled the vast wealth of Holy Mother Church. A milquetoast at heart. John Paul, however, was neither a spiritual warrior nor a determined reformer. Of all the popes of the 20th century, he was perhaps the most timorous. On one occasion, when a gust of wind blew a score of documents from his hands to the roof of the Apostolic Palace, John Paul became so distraught that his attendants had to place him in bed, where he remained with a rosary between his fingers until the papers were found. Nevertheless, reliable sources contend that the new pope was moved to action as he learned more and more about the inner workings of Vatican Incorporated. According to author David Yallop, John Paul announced on September 28 his decision to remove Archbishop Marcinkus from the IOR, to transfer Cardinal Baggio to the Diocese of Florence, and to force Cardinal Vio into retirement. This contention is supported by declassified documents from the U.S. Department of State and the CIA. The presumed papal simpleton, who ceaselessly spoke to his friends and associates about his fondness for Pinocchio, seemed suddenly set on becoming a real pope. It was 1978. The strategy of tension was still in effect. Aldo Moro remained intent on forming a coalition government with socialists and communists. Liberation theology continued to spread throughout Latin America, giving rise to left-wing guerrillas and left-wing governments. The CIA had lost its connection to the drug lords of Southeast Asia and was engaged in a new search for opium to fund its black operations. All matters, including the utilization of the offshore corporations set up by Sindona and Calvi, awaited final resolution. The timing could not be worse for an upheaval within the IOR. The macabre grimace.
Okay, so 1978. This is when 1978, 79, that is when they were having the droughts in Burma. Also, the Chinese government and those governments realized what was kind of, I wonder how much their government, it would be interesting to get some documents to see what they actually knew or know. It appears that they are becoming aware of what Operation Gladio is, how they are bringing weapons and funding both sides of a war, taking the heroin, selling it, making money. And now the Vatican at this same time period, so 1978, this was the Pope that I was just reading about just a minute ago. So this Pope got rid of Marcinkus, who the CIA, along with Jelly and Sindona, made sure was in place. They intentionally put him in head of the bank next to the Pope, so they would always have an audience. They would always have his ear. This Pope, I think he knew. There must have been something, or he must have been threatened, but John Paul was the most timid Pope. So just think, you drop some papers that blow away in the wind and you're in a panic. Why would that cause you to panic? I don't think he likes what's going on. I think that if you're a Catholic and you believe in the teachings and you're the Pope and you don't want to be a part of what is going on and you're trying to make changes, I would be fearful for my life as well. So the CIA is in all kinds of upheaval. The IOR is going to be investigated. The CIA has lost its opium connection, and they've lost their connection. Marcinkus, who is the ear to the Pope.
The morning after John Paul made these alleged announcements, he was found dead under conditions that continue to baffle investigators. At 4:30,
I should have predicted. Okay, so I did not listen to all of this chapter today, and I usually listen to it twice. So I've listened to everything up until this point. As you can see, you don't go along, you start redoing everything, everything's in chaos. You're not going to last very long. You have a habit of going away. You have a boating accident, or you do something to yourself with a shotgun that is not realistic and not possible. Suddenly get cancer, really rapid growing, get a doctor to corroborate that. I'm not saying that this has happened. That's just what allegedly has happened.
8 a.m., Sister Vincenza, following her morning routine, knocked at the door of the papal bedchambers and left a pot of coffee on a table in the hallway. When she returned a half-hour later, she found the tray untouched. After knocking at the door and receiving no reply, she called out, "Buonasera, Papa." The room was still. Entering the room, she found the Pope sitting up in bed with his eyeglasses half off his nose. His fingers were clutched around a file, and papers were strewn among the bed covers. As soon as she approached him, Sister Vincenza reeled back in horror. The Pope's lips were pulled back in a macabre grimace. His gums were exposed, and his eyes appeared to have popped from their sockets. The nun shrieked with alarm and pulled a bell to summon Father John McGee, John Paul's secretary. As soon as McGee saw the Pope's condition, he telephoned Cardinal Villot, who occupied an apartment within the Lateran Palace. Villot, according to Vatican sources, uttered in French the following cry of surprise. "Mon Dieu, c'est vrai tout ça? My God, is all that true?" Then he asked McGee an extraordinary question. "Does anybody else know the Holy Father is dead?" McGee replied on the phone that no one knew except the Vatican nun. Villot then told McGee that no one, not even Sister Vincenza, must be allowed to enter the Pope's bedroom, and that he, as the Vatican Camerlengo, presiding cardinal, would handle matters as soon as he arrived. Villot's satchel. Villot appeared in a matter of
I haven't heard of this cover-up angle before.
Moments. To McGee's amazement, the cardinal was shaved, well-groomed, and in full ecclesiastical attire. It seemed as though Villot was set to make a public appearance. The time was 5 a.m. Before proceeding with the rite of extreme unction, Villot began placing items from the Pope's bedroom in a satchel, including the vial of low blood pressure medicine that John Paul kept on a bedside table, the papers that were scattered on the bed covers, and the Pope's appointment book and last will. Finally, he removed John Paul's glasses and slippers. None of these things were ever seen again. A physician's pronouncement. Villot telephoned.
If you don't go along, you're not going to be around very much.
Dr. Renato Buzzonetti, the Vatican physician, and instructed McGee to make arrangements for...
Okay, let me pause for 1 second. So this is the exact same time frame that everything was going down in South America. So that is important to remember, these time frames.
The immediate transfer of Sister Vincenza to the cloistered environment of her mother house in Venice. At this point in the story, the nun disappeared. No investigator, not even John Cornwell, who became the official Vatican snoop in this case, was permitted to interview her. Cornwell was merely told that she had died shortly after arriving at the mother house. The British journalist accepted this explanation without question. Neither he nor any other reporter who probed into John Paul's death has been able to uncover the proper name of Sister Vincenza, let alone a reason for her abrupt dismissal from the Vatican. Dr. Buzzonetti arrived at 5:45, examined the body, and announced to McGee and Villot that the Pope had suffered a coronary occlusion, that he had died between 10:30 and 11 the previous evening, and that he had suffered nothing. But the Holy...
Well, I don't know what... I'd have to know what diseases would cause your eyes to pop out of their sockets. Off the top of my head, I don't know any. I can research it real quick.
Holy Father's bulging eyes and horrific grimace seemed to tell a different story. Bizarre post-mortem. Shortly after the physician left, two morticians, Ernesto and Arnaldo Signoraci, appeared out of nowhere. It was 6 a.m. Vio must have summoned them as soon as he received the call from Father McGee. That is, before 5 a.m., before he called Dr. Buzzanetti, and before he had even seen the body. What's more, the morticians had been transported to the Vatican by an official car that presumably had to be dispatched before Vio entered the papal bedchamber. When Cornwell interviewed the Signoraci brothers, they were unable to confirm the time of their arrival. They only affirmed that it was early in the morning. Even though the bodies of the popes are traditionally not embalmed, the two morticians, under instructions from Vio, began to inject embalming fluid into John Paul's body as soon as they arrived. This unorthodox means of embalming without draining the corpse of blood would serve to prevent any possibility of a complete autopsy and any accurate determination of the cause of death. The morticians also manipulated the distorted jaw of the Pope, corrected his horrible grimace, and closed his eyes. When interviewed by Cornwell, the brothers admitted that they had opened the dead Pope's femoral arteries and injected an anti-putrid fluid before removing the body from the Vatican. They could not remember either the room or the place where they had performed this procedure. A fabricated story. While the Pope's body was being infused with the fluid, Vio instructed
Yeah, it seems like it was most likely strangulation.
McGee to relate to the world a fabricated story about the morning's events. McGee was to say that he, not Sister Vincenza, had found the Pope's body. He was to make no mention of the papers that were strewn across the bed or the items Vio tucked away in his satchel. What's more, in order to provide a proper ecclesiastical spin to the tale, McGee was to say that John Paul had died with a copy of The Imitation of Christ,
Oh, wow.
the great devotional work by St. Thomas à Kempis, clutched in his hand. At 6:30 a.m., Vio conveyed the news of the Pope's death to Cardinal Carlo Confalonieri, the 86-year-old dean of the Sacred College. Cardinal Agostino Casaroli, head of the Vatican Diplomatic Corps, and Sergeant Hans Rogan of the Swiss Guards. The news was beginning to spread throughout the Vatican village. At 6:45 a.m., Sergeant Rogan came upon Archbishop Marcinkus in a courtyard near the Vatican Bank. This was most unusual. Marcinkus, who lived 20 minutes from the Vatican in the Villa Stritch, was a late riser who never appeared at his office before 9 a.m. When the sergeant blurted out the news, Marcinkus stared at Rogan, displayed no emotion, and made no comment. Later, when questioned by Cornwell about his lack of reaction, Marcinkus offered this explanation. "I thought Rogan said, 'Hey, I dreamed the Pope was dead.'" At 7:27 a.m., nearly 3 hours after Sister Vincenza discovered the Pope's body, Vatican Radio made the following announcement. This morning, September 29, 1978, about 5:30, the private secretary of the Pope, contrary to custom, not having found the Holy Father in the chapel of his private apartment, looked for him in his room and found him dead in bed with a light on, like one who was intent on reading. The physician, Dr. Renato Buzzanetti, who hastened to the Pope's room, verified the death, which took place presumably toward 11 o'clock yesterday evening, as sudden death that could be related to acute myocardial infarction.
I guess a heart attack could be the cause. The jaw being displaced and having to be put back in socket is a little strange. Yeah.
The story unravels. Despite Cardinal Vio's care in fabricating the fiction, the story quickly began to unravel upon inspection. The first problem came with The Imitation of Christ. John Paul's copy could not be found within the papal apartment. It remained among his belongings in Venice, where he had served as patriarch. On October 2nd, the Vatican was forced to admit that the Holy Father was not reading The Imitation of Christ at the time of his demise, but rather was holding in his hands certain sheets of paper containing his personal writings, such as homilies, speeches, reflections, and various notes. On October 5th, after continual badgering from the press, the Vatican came clean and admitted that the papers the Holy Father was clutching concerned his decision to make critical changes within the Roman Curia, including the Vatican Bank. The second problem came with the work of the morticians. Italian law dictated that no embalming should be undertaken until 24 hours after death, without dispensation from a magistrate. For this reason, the immediate injection of anti-putrid fluid into the body of the Pope without draining the blood smacked of foul play. On October 1st, Corriere della Sera, Milan's daily newspaper, published a front-page story titled, "Why Say No to an Autopsy?" The story called for a complete disclosure of all facts relating to the Pope's death and concluded by saying, "The Church has nothing to fear, therefore nothing to lose. On the contrary, it would have much to gain. Now, to know what the Pope died of is of a legitimate historical fact. It is part of our visible history and does not in any way affect the spiritual mystery of his death. The body that we leave behind when we die can be understood with our poor instruments. It is a leftover. The soul is already, or rather it has always been, dependent on other laws which are not human and so remain inscrutable. Let us not make out of a mystery a secret to guard for earthly reasons, and let us recognize the smallness of our secrets. Let us not declare sacred what is not." No cardiopathic symptoms. These demands intensified when John Paul's personal physician.
Okay, so now we're going to have the physician come in. We're going to find out, could it be poison? I can't remember if this was the Pope that they possibly found a ring or there's too many that have happened since I've started doing this research that there's 3 that are confusing me, because there's the one that died in 1963 that was supposedly from cancer. And the only reason why I question that one is because at that time, the CIA, Julian, tell me his name. I'm having a brain fart. The guy from Texas that had the house. Was it Oswald? Waiting for Julian. Or someone else can tell me. Lee Harvey Oswald. Him and his girlfriend and some other people were supposedly CIA, and they say they weren't. So I'm wondering if they were Gladio soldiers. But they were researching. They were searching how to come up with some kind of chemical or some kind of an injection that they could use that they could inject into someone that would cause a rapid growing cancer. They were intending to use that in hold on. In Cuba. They were using it. They were going to use it on the president of Cuba, Fidel Castro. They had perfected it. It had worked on mice. They 100% killed all the mice very quickly. There's no documentation of this. This is purely my own speculation. So this Pope dies in 1963, and then you have JFK going in that same year in November. Kind of crazy. So there's been popes that I have had my suspicions about. Anyone that is going to make changes to the way that things are, don't live very long.
Physicians said that the Pope was in good health. He had absolutely no cardiopathic characteristics, Dr. Carlo Frizzerio said. Besides, his low blood pressure should, in theory, have made him safe from acute cardiovascular attacks.
Okay.
The only time I needed to give him treatment was for the influenza attack. This diagnosis was verified by Dr. Antonio da Ros, who examined the Pope on Saturday, September 23rd, and told the press, "Non sta bene ma benone." He is not well, but very well. The Pope's good physical condition was attributed to his lifestyle. He exercised regularly, never smoked, drank alcohol only rarely, and kept a healthy diet. At the time of his death, John Paul was 65. Numerous heart specialists throughout the world, including Dr. Christian Barnard of South Africa and Dr. Seamus Banim of London, took to task Dr. Buzzinetti's diagnosis of myocardial infarction without conducting an autopsy as incredible and preposterous. Such critiques caused Vio to concoct another story. He told his fellow cardinals, who pressed for an autopsy, that the real cause of John Paul's death was not a heart attack. The Holy Father, he assured them, had unwittingly taken a fatal overdose of Efortil, his blood pressure medicine. If an autopsy was conducted, Vio said, it would give rise to the belief that the Pope had committed suicide.
But he didn't have
canon lies.
blood pressure.
When this explanation failed to quiet the clamor for an autopsy, Vio proclaimed that canon law expressly prohibited the body of a pope from being subjected to post-mortem surgery. This statement gave rise to yet another problem. Canon law neither banned nor condoned papal autopsies, but failed to address the subject. What's more, scholars quickly pointed out that an autopsy had been performed on the body of Pius VII in 1830. Rumor quickly became rampant that John Paul had died of poisoning. Some speculated that a lethal dosage of digitalis had been added to the Efortil, the liquid medicine for low blood pressure the Pope kept by his bedside. Such a mixture would induce vomiting that would account for the necessity of Vio's removal of the Pope's glasses and slippers. Brother Fabian, the Vatican pharmacist, used this theory to provide a final...
Okay, so he had low blood pressure, so he had medication to bring it up. Did he have high blood pressure medication just in case he took too much of that medication, or did it stabilize out?
Final explanation for the Pope's demise. John Paul, he said, was taking digoxin for a heart problem and could have swallowed a few pills before taking a slug of Efortil, with tragic results. But this explanation also proved to be bogus. John Paul had never received a prescription for digoxin. That drug had been used by Paul VI. Ejun Polacco. On Monday, October 16, 1978, the CIA's plans came to fruition as its dark horse candidate ascended to the papal throne as John Paul II. The news of the selection of Karol Wojtyla's election caught the teeming crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square by surprise. The people expected the election of some established member of the Vatican bureaucracy, such as the progressive Cardinal Benelli or the conservative Cardinal Siri. They were stunned to hear the name of Wojtyla. Even members of the press turned to one another to ask, "Who is Wojtyla?" His strange-sounding name led many to believe that the new pope might be an African or Asian. Eventually, Father Andrew Greeley of Chicago told them, "Ejun Polacco. He is a Pole." It was one thing to elect a Pole, such as the famous anti-communist Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski, but quite another to elect one about whom so little was known. Who was Wojtyla? How had a junior cardinal come to the throne in less than 2 days of balloting? Not only was the election unexpected, but the new pope also looked unusual as a Holy Father. He lacked the delicate, almost effete features of Paul VI and Pius XII. His hulking physical frame and his non-intellectual mannerisms seemed to some observers antithetical to the Roman grace and refinement of many of his predecessors. This lack of refinement came to the fore during his first public appearance. Wojtyla, as John Paul II, approached a group of American reporters and beseeched them with the folded hands of a penitent to be good to him. A few minutes later, in a further effort to ingratiate himself with the press, the new pope cupped his hands like a megaphone and shouted his blessing to the milling crowd like a cheerleader at a football game. The unknown Wojtyla. Gradually, the public came to learn that Wojtyla, as a young man, had sought not to become a priest, but an actor. They further learned that he had worked in a chemical factory under Nazi control during World War II. Although no one knew for certain if he had been the leader of an underground movement which assisted Jews, or a Nazi collaborator. Rumors persisted that he had developed romantic attachments to many women and may have been married.
Oh,
The alleged marriage helped to explain the so-called Great Gap in John Paul's career, the 5-year span of time between 1939 and 1944. But certain things about the new pope eventually came to light. Cardinal Vio and the Masonic cardinals had engineered his campaign with the help of American cardinals Cody and Kroll, and celebrated his election not with traditional Te Deums and official prayers, but rather a gala champagne party in which the new Holy Father filled the empty glasses of the nearest cardinals and nuns while warbling his favorite song, a Polish number called The Mountaineer. After the coronation, the Vatican Incorporated returned to business as usual. Cardinal Vio remained Secretary of State, and Archbishop Marcinkus returned to his position as the head of the IOR.
okay.
The ties to Roberto Calvi, Licio Gelli, and the CIA were renewed, and the time became ripe for a deal with the Turks.
Okay. So the whole point of that whole entire chapter was between 1978 and 1979, everything was a disaster for the CIA. The opium fields had been dried up from drought. Then the China and the Golden Triangle was aware of the weapons going into there, so they had banned the selling of drugs or the trafficking of drugs, and they clamped down on it. And at that same time period, they have a pope that's come into office that doesn't like what they're doing. So they wanted to cut the CIA out. And how do you do that? You reorganize the IOR. You restructure it. They were trying to get rid of Marcinkus. Marcinkus was planted there to be the go-between, to be the eyes and the ears for the Pope. So the Pope mysteriously dies, supposedly of heart attack, blood pressure medication, which he had was healthy. They completely lied about how he died. The papers that he was so terrified when they blew away in the wind and why he was so skittish and terrified is it had all of his plans of everything that he was going to do to change everything up and get back to the way things were supposed to be before the CIA, the mafia, and all these people were working together with the secret government, laundering money, laundering drugs, working in secret. And once he died, they get a guy from Poland who apparently was married maybe for a 5-year span, had kids possibly, and was not a traditional pope. So I kind of would be very interested to figure out what's going to happen to the rest of him. So we did 2 chapters tonight, and we will do our next installment of Operation Gladio on Sunday. And I promise you that my brain will be a lot more refreshed. So I apologize that I was a little bit rusty tonight. I'm kind of surprised. I forgot to send out my notification on Twitter. I forgot to set up my chat on Locals. I sat down at my desk and forgot to open up my chat, forgot to push play on Rumble. Anyway, guys, thank you for being here. Does anyone have any questions? Is everything starting to kind of click together, kind of make sense of how? So we always talk about Operation Gladio in the form of creating a coup. Well, they kind of created a coup with the Pope because he didn't like what they were doing. The IOR is at talk. Hold on. I don't think that went through all the way. The whole goal is Gladio has been to overthrow governments, but you can overthrow the Vatican. You can take people out in positions that you don't like. And if you have the right people, how many people did Hillary have? 50, 60? What is she up to? 72? Yes, I am so glad you guys I'm glad to be back. I actually am glad the internet. Let me finish this thought, then I'll go back to that. So if you kind of see how Gladio operates, and you kind of see how they get their funding, how they get their money, you can start even with everything that's going on right now. So currently we have the student protesters protesting they were in California. Now they were, I think, Ole Miss today. They were in New York, and I don't know the other ones. Oh, Texas. There was some at the University of Utah, but they got disbanded by rain. Good night, Think Right. Thanks for coming. Appreciate you. So you look at that. And if you take your emotion out of it and you're not picking a side and you just take a step back and see how are all of these people being organized? I'm not saying that there aren't genuine Michigan as well. I'm not saying that there aren't genuine protesters. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not saying that this is the case. This is just where my head is going. If I can take the emotion out of it, I think logical and I put my Gladio glasses on. Because when you have your Gladio glasses on, and you know that they have overthrown just about every single government. You have South and North Korea, you have Vietnam, you have Turkey, France, Spain, Italy, Germany. I'm sure I'm missing some. And then you have all the ones in South America. You have Argentina. You had Argentina is the one that stands out because that was the one that was most tragic for me to cover. Um, all of them, all the countries there, every single one of them, every single country that's had a coup has Operation Gladio written all over it. And if you understand that, you have to question how things are going. So while all of these protests are going on right now, what are we being distracted from right now? They're passing the anti-Semitism. I don't know what they call it. I don't know what they're calling the bill. They're passing a bill to where certain passages of the Bible are going to be hate speech. You have other things that you can't say they're considered hate speech, which that's not freedom of speech, and that's terrifying to me. Then you have, um, they promised that in Israel and in that area, Palestine, that the United States would not put any boots on the ground. So what are they doing? They're on an island. They're on like a pier. So they don't have any boots on the ground per se, but they're there. They have soldiers there. I don't know what's going on. I've got to dig deeper into that. I just started learning of it today. There is, was it 300 billion? Oh, let me look it up real quick. Let me see. How much? There are $300 billion worth of oil in Palestine. Currently, they're building a canal to be able to access it. Supposedly, they're building a canal for something else. $3 billion worth of oil. And that's not counting natural gas or actual gas. I don't know. I don't understand how all that stuff is made. But I know that you have to, I think you have to get the oil out first. I don't know, there's a process. But there's a lot of stuff. Ukraine, there's oil, there's good farmland, and they don't want Russia. Russia's a problem for them. So think about the things going on in the world. So we're all distracted with these protesters. Everyone on Twitter Spaces, everyone on X, everyone is talking about these protesters. And in my head, all I think is, what are they trying to run through the government? They ran through the TikTok bill. They slid that into the aid package into Ukraine, Israel, and Thailand. So they slid that nice and easy in there because everyone was distracted by everything else. Was it okay? So that was slid in when everyone was distracted by Iran bombed, Israel bombed Iran, Iran bombed back, and then Israel bombed back. So during that whole entire time is when they slipped in the TikTok bill into everything with the foreign aid package, right? And the reason why is TikTok is not owned by a US company, which means it is difficult for the people who want to spy on us. They say, "Oh, China's spying on us and downloading all our information." Is that really the case? Or is it maybe or possibly, I'm not saying it's the case, but this is a possibility that just maybe it's because the United States doesn't have control and they can't censor you with their algorithms. And there is some censorship, but not as much as the government would like. So if it was owned by a US company, then they would have more control of what was being said or not being said. And it's a lot easier to do that. You have to control the narrative. You have to control language in order to control the people. Because I'll tell you what, before I tell you this all the time. Yes, guys? And so when people say I'm just a MAGA Republican, I'm far right. No, I'm not. I'm very an independent voter. I voted for Biden and I will repent. And the way I do that is by educating people on the things I've learned because I dug deep. I actually looked into the things that Trump did. I also looked into the things that Biden said he did that Trump started, or things that Biden undid, then redid to say that he did them. Right. So I did a lot of research. And how do I know that it's really easy to take someone who just, "Oh, I just want to get the news, right? Listen to the news, go to bed, whatever old people do. And when you realize how much they've lied to you, and how much they've done, like how easy it is to get just people who are just want to raise families, people who just want to have a normal life, grow up in this world and be happy. And you find out everything's a lie and that they lie to us. And it's very easily to do so, especially, I think it's the easiest to do so, especially for women who are raising kids in their family. Like husbands might be more aware, men might be more aware. They're out in the world. I don't know. When you're raising kids, at least for me, I didn't have time for TV. I never had cable. Um, it was a luxury that I couldn't afford. So I didn't watch the news. And the news was always dark and it made me just like, it made me always think about crime and what could happen. I didn't want to live like that. So I didn't watch it. But when the 2020 stuff all went through, you had the impeachment trials of Trump. I didn't know. I watched CNN and MSNBC. I didn't even think to watch Fox because I didn't have Fox News Network, right? You're so distracted. So I was watching Fox News. I didn't watch Fox News Network. So I was like, oh, Trump's this evil guy. Like, I can't believe he said this. I can't believe he said that. And then I would look, I'm like, oh my gosh, this man really said that. And then I had someone say to me, why don't you go out and watch Fox News? And I'm like, okay, right. But what could it hurt? Okay, so I started watching Fox News, and this is right after Biden got elected. Okay. And then the January 6th stuff happened after the election in 2021. And I never really bought the whole narrative, not because of anything. I just something just seemed off to me. Just something just seemed off. So, I kind of took a step back, started watching Fox News. I'm like, they're so opposite. How can these people have the same truth but have such opposite narratives? So they take pieces. It's like what a narcissist does is they tell you half truths. They tell you enough of the truth so that you'll believe the rest of the lie. We are back 2-4 in the Southwest. Oh, I thought you were talking about my Southwest flight because that's another whole disaster of life. And I'll talk about it another day. I was not in the mood today. But so a narcissist lies to people by telling you half the truth. My brother was a classic narcissist and he would tell it with a straight face and he would believe a lie. So that's what these news organizations do to us. They give us just enough of the truth to where you have to question everything else. Well, that's true. So you believe everything else they tell you, right? That's what I did. And so I realized that there's two opposites of these narratives. I started digging deeper and I already spent a year, like every day, trying to learn everything about this virus that was going around everywhere I could, trying to figure out the truth about it. And, you know, anyway, when I do these streams, and today my brain wasn't as sharp as it normally is, and I'm not quite sure why. And I apologize for that, but the end of the day, I want to bring truth. I don't think this is not I'm not being fear porn, I'm not trying to scare anybody. I don't think that I fear for our I fear for my kids. I fear for my grandkids I don't have yet. The propaganda, the way they've changed the education system from being logical to emotional so people are more easily manipulated terrifies me. My daughter is completely brainwashed. My son is not. And coming she had to pick me up from the airport the other night, and we haven't had a chance to sit and talk for a while, and her belief system is so warped, but she's at that age where she knows everything. Nothing I say to her is gonna change her mind. She's the smartest person in the room. "Mom's stupid. You just got into politics." I'm like, "I'm a very intelligent person. I went to college. I worked hard because I wanted to go to college because I wanted to be somebody, but most importantly, I wanted to be a mom, but I wanted to be smart. I wanted to be a smart mom, and this is before everything was corrupted." But so there's an age between like 17 and probably 23 or 24 where a girl I don't know about boys 'cause I'm not a boy. I'm just going from my life experiences and what I know about other females, where they think that they know everything, and there is nothing that you can do to change their mind. You can give them little nuggets of truth, but you can't argue because they are 100% right, and you are the dumbest person in the world because you're a parent. You're the parent, they know everything. I was not reading about politics, and no, I wasn't a political person. I was raising a family. I was raising my kids to be good kids, but the terrifying thing is, I have never, ever, ever, ever been pro-abortion for myself. I could never, ever, ever it was never an option. You do the time you do the crime, you do the time. Yes, I'm talking about my daughter. You do the crime, you do the time. And I always taught my kids, do not have sex until you are financially able and ready to take care of a child because the consequences of sex is a child. And that wasn't to not have kids or have an abortion. It was you don't do that because there's life and you need to be a responsible person when you do that, right? We're driving home and she tells me, first of all, she tells me that Trump's racist and that he hates brown people. And my kids are brown. I don't know that clip. You'll have to send it to me. Um, but anyway, I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "He hates brown people." I don't know, I understand what you're giving up on, Julian, because I'm trying to tell a story, so it's harder to I don't know what you're asking. I've answered all your questions. What are you giving up on? Anyway, yes, I'm talking about my daughter, and I don't know what you're giving up on. Anyway, so there's that. And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, he hates Mexican people. He passed all these laws, and my friend's dad was gonna get deported, and he's been here in this country for 20 years." I'm like, "Well, was he here illegally?" "That's beside the point. He has the right to be here, and he just hates him because he's brown." I'm like, "Okay, so I wasn't gonna win that battle." And somehow we got on to kids and grandkids. I'm like, "You need to do some more reading." I don't know. I read all of your things that you wrote, Julian, just because I don't think they make sense. I did read all your words. Um, anyway, so we're driving home and we were talking about finances, house, economy, it's like just like simple political stuff. And she's like, "Well, if I were to get pregnant right now, I would have an abortion." I'm like, I'm like, and I almost start crying because I'm like, Where? Like, I didn't raise you to be like this. Like, that's life inside of you. Like, there's no way that I was gonna do like you're here on this planet because I didn't take any of those actions." And anyway, long story short, our kids are being brainwashed and we've got to figure it out. Truth matters. And we've got to figure out how to reach this other generation. And that's going to come from people being knowledgeable themselves. And now I've lost all my train of thought. There was a point, but I guess I'm going to be done rambling because now I don't know. All right, guys, we will be For sure, Saturday night, gonna do movie night. Sunday, we're going to be back to Gladio. Monday nights and Thursday nights, I'm gonna be switching up. So we'll do Gladio a second night after that. I'm gonna do one night with Little Miss Jacobs on we haven't decided which one night it's gonna be on her channel, the other night it's gonna be on my channel. I don't know which night we're gonna do which. We're gonna kind of do like what did you miss on Twitter, right? Because Twitter, everything goes super fast. I'm gonna I will cover and look up the political angle of things because I pay attention to that stuff, and she's gonna do more of the culture things, like all of the, I don't know how to explain it, like content creator stuff, Crowder, like more of that stuff, like 'cause that's more in her wheelhouse. So I think between the 2 of us that we could come up with a really good some good content. Everything on X goes super fast. So we're gonna do a recap. So I don't know if we're gonna combine the 2, but I'm thinking that it'd be smart to do one with, political stuff, what's going on in the government, and one with just, like, lifestyle, pop culture type stuff. And then I've gotta talk to Traveling Fools because me and him are going to start doing one night of deep dive conspiracy theories. And I think that we're gonna do, is Graham Hancock. We're gonna do his book series. I'm thinking of starting at book 1, and just going through them. I think that would be fun. And we'll continue to do Twitch as well. So, with that being said, guys, hit the like button. Hi, Ford. Hit the like button. Share off platform. Let me take this. If you're on X, leave a comment after you close it. That would be fantastic. Okay, with that said, guys, I hope you have a great night. And I will tell you my Southwest Airlines story. I didn't want to tell you about it tonight because I was a little heated tonight. And it's funny after the fact, but today I was kind of pissy. So don't wear a Trump hat and fly Southwest Airlines is the moral of the story, but there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to it. Anyway, with that said, guys, I'm ending this stream in 3, 2,